Welcome back to a Munchausen's Proxy, where I have finally managed to bring myself to watch the last episode of this blessedly truncated miniseries that I am sure Declan de Barra and Hissrich were desperately hoping would be their way of making the Witcher franchise truly theirs. And while this piece of creatively bankrupt excrement will definitely not be expanded upon, it has well and truly made the Witcher Netflix franchise, nascent though it was, wholly their disaster. As you can tell, I was right in thinking that the finale to this supposed origin of the Witchers would not improve my opinion of what de Barra was trying to do. So let's get into this spoiler review of the last episode of The Witcher, Blood Origin, shall we? We begin this train wreck with more inane narration by the criminally misused Minnie Driver, as she tells us more of what we either already know or what they are about to show us on screen. Empress Evelyn is sending military guy with a scouting party to another world now that she has Lenny Henry back on board the "let's conquer worlds we know nothing about" plan for solving a food shortage, rather than using some of the obviously unused land we have seen people traveling throughout this series to, I don't know, maybe farm? How are these people so incompetent that wars last 1,000 years and they manage to not be able to feed the rather sparse populations that they have shown in this series thus far? Evelyn speechifies to her troops before they go through the portal Lenny creates, telling them to look for food sources above all else, because they can't conquer other worlds until they are sure the lowborn won't slaughter the nobles while the soldiers are off-world, taking over more lands for them to mismanage. She tells military guy to watch Lenny Henry like a viper, and he promises he will, keeping body positivity's sidekick within knife's reach. And then they clasp arms, like she is a real warrior, or like he is actually believable as one either. So Lenny Henry opens the portal, and immediately military guy marches through with the troops, and Lenny follows, with body positivity sidekick bringing up the rear, and now at least 30 feet away from military guy or his troops. So we are off to a splendid start by the writers and the director on this episode already. The portal closes and Evelyn is wrenching her shoulder out of the socket, congratulating herself, the deluded little twit actually believing her idiotic planning and maneuvering is working. Meanwhile, on the other side of the portal, we of course are on the Blue Ball of Energy's world, because Lenny Henry has figured out what it wants from him to sacrifice in order to get the chaos magic he wants. Oh, and he is still trying to put his own ass on the throne, so he has a chance to mismanage things and thereby show that he can be as incompetent as the nobles are. While the soldiers spread out, Sidekick asks if he means to sacrifice the soldiers, and we start what I was sure was coming, namely a knockoff of the scene from Avengers Infinity War, where Thanos has to sacrifice Gamora because she is what he loves most in order to get an Infinity Stone. Lenny Henry begins to tell Sidekick that, while she is not his blood, she is the blood of his heart, and the one he values the most. And you can see her finally get a clue. He uses magic to slit her throat, the look of betrayal on her face almost comedic. Magic immediately begins gathering about him. Military guy and his men turn around and realize pretty quickly for a bunch of morons on a suicide mission that they are completely screwed. Lenny opens a portal behind them and military guy leads them in a charge at Lenny, only to be sucked into the portal while Lenny Henry says his villain speech, that he gave military guy everything he wanted, and still he betrayed Lenny Henry. So he hopes that wherever the portal takes them, that they burn for eternity. Lenny then leans back his head and is suddenly somewhere else, somewhere that is snowing. Somehow. Footprints walk toward him in the snow and stop, as if the person making them were standing next to him. We hear Blue Ball of Energy ask him what he is going to do with all of the chaos magic he now has, and he replies that he is going to take what he has always deserved. Everything. Back in Zentrea, Cyan rides through the streets at the head of her strike force, Fjall in chains, and everybody other than him disguised as soldiers. He mutters to Ayla that it won't take much to start a riot, given how starved the people are. Cyan takes Fjall into the palace, the rest of them waiting outside. For reasons? Nobody else is helping her with him. Just Cyan. Evelyn's mage comes running into the throne room, babbling about Sindrel's magic book, saying that they can travel not just between worlds, but through time as well, which is when Cyan and Fjall arrive. Cyan brings him to kneel before Evelyn and asks for what she was promised. She tells the Empress that Ayla and some others that joined her are all dead, the others being dealt with for free. She just wants to get what she is owed and to get out of Zentrea. And we get one of the many annoying cuts in this episode, as we are now outside as the strike force takes the grain storage, killing the soldiers on guard and others that are watching from nearby rooftops, making sure that they do not sound the alarm. And we are back with Evelyn, as she double-crosses Cyan, telling her that she is not getting her clan's sword, and then lecturing her on how she is a betrayer of her fellow warriors, and Leslie a disgrace to her ancestors and the Ghost Clan. Cyan tells her that she will honor her agreement. Evelyn orders her to be taken to the square and beheaded by the sword she came for, her head to be placed on the city gates. Cyan curses her as she is dragged away, saying, "May your womb rot and your name be forgotten." As the soldiers take her through the hall out of the throne room, we see the legs of the monster seeming to parallel the soldiers and Cyan as they turn down another hall. A shot that winds up being inconsequential to anything that happens later. And we cut to the dwarf, telling Ayla they need to start the riot as they stand outside the grain storage, telling her to do her part. Ayla starts talking to the people starting to gather in the square, telling them that the grain stores are theirs, that they farmed it, and of course some of them recognize her. Sindrel opens the doors and they find the granary empty. As the crowd starts yelling about it, Ayla tells them that this kind of betrayal and starvation are all they can expect from the Empress and her empire. One of the women in the crowd starts singing Ayla's song, of course, and the crowd joins in. She sends the crowd to spread the word, and other soldiers in the strike force go with them to help sow chaos that they need. Ayla, the dwarf, Sindrel, the witch, and tavern guy head for the palace to help Cyan and Fjall get the monster and the Empress and her minions. And we're back in the throne room. The Empress is trying to get through to Fjall, and she wonders what happened to him. She tells him that all he has heard is true. She tells him that the old ways had to die, that she will lead them into a new golden age. She wants him by her side, and she understands that he will need time to understand and decide for himself. He begins laughing, telling her she is demented. He begins jerking, his eyes going black and black veins popping out on his face after calling her a monster. He kills the guard standing near him and breaks the chains. Just two guards get her out of the throne room. He hears a noise behind him and turns to see the monster behind him. And we cut to Cyan killing her guards. Before, we cut to the witch and Sindrel, trying to break the palace doors, but having no luck as they seem to be made out of a special metal resistant to magic. Cyan, however, opens the door for them. More dead guards on the floor inside the doors. They head for the monolith, but On the way, they hear soldiers coming. Sian the dwarf and tavern guy stay behind to hold off the soldiers. The witch Frenching tavern guy and both of them telling each other to stay safe. Ayla goes with the witch and Sindril to destroy the monolith, and you immediately know, if you have a functioning brain, that they oh so conveniently will run into Evelyn, so Ayla can kill her. The warriors staying behind kill a bunch of soldiers, the dwarf catching an arrow in the shoulder and yanking it out to fire at another soldier. More soldiers come, and we cut to the riot outside. The people charging a line of soldiers, and right as they are about to clash, we are in with Fjall in the throne room as he picks up one of the dead soldiers' swords and begins fighting the creature. It throws the lightning that turned his family to dust during the coup, but he dodges and slides under the monster, slicing its legs on the way by, and another cut to Ayla and her party ducking back inside the side corridor because they almost run into Evelyn and her now 4 guards. Soldiers want to take the Empress to one of the barracks, but Evelyn wants to go to her quarters first. Sindril tells Ayla to follow the Empress. They can deal with the monolith. When we cut to the Empress's quarters, where she grabs a book and wraps it in cloth, but here's the guards outside her room dying. Ayla comes in as Evelyn pulls her dagger. She recognizes Ayla and tries to justify herself. Ayla tells her that she has no idea what she is doing, and never has. She is nothing but a spoiled princess. Evelyn fires back that she's an empress, and that small minds will never understand. And then it gets really dumb. As if it wasn't dumb already. As Ayla tells her that the closer she got to the capital, the more she thought what Evelyn did was right. The monarchies were crushing the people, and the clans were just their thugs, keeping the people down. Evelyn tries to stab Ayla, but she catches her hand, turning it towards Evelyn's face and telling her that she was just more of the same, changing nothing. She stabs Evelyn in the gut, telling her to listen to the people outside cheering. Pushing her away, Ayla gives her a choice. Leave the blade in, and maybe a physic will get to her and heal her, allowing her to see her world crumble before her eyes and face her wrongs. Or she can pull the blade out and bleed to death, a coward. No one will know. No one but her. And another cut, as we go to the monolith square, as a portal opens, and Lenny Henry steps out, reveling in the magic coursing through him. A soldier runs out to tell him of the uprising, and Lenny kills him with a gout of fire. Sindril sees him and yells that he has corrupted everything, and it ends now. Lenny blasts him with fire, but he and the witch duck behind a column. They can feel the chaos magic from the other world even more now. But we cut to Fjall, running from the blasts of the monster, grabbing an axe off one of the weapons racks, and leaping with horrendous CGI to hit the monster in the head with the axe. It stumbles about the throne room before falling out of a window behind the throne, Fjall still holding onto the axe buried in its head. Fjall falls onto a balcony as the creature continues falling, before they go back to the throne room and show Evelyn stumbling in, picking up her fallen crown, sitting on the throne, and placing it on her head. The head of the mercenaries from the strike force comes in, asking if she knows the way to the royal mint. He is dressed in noble's clothing and jewelry and eating from a goblet. The peasants come in with weapons, and Evelyn pulls the dagger out, saying, "Remember me," as she laughs, and dies. Fjall comes to, and the monster comes flying at the balcony, crawling onto it. It is about to kill him when Ayla, of course, comes to the rescue by throwing a blade and hitting it in the eye. It smacks her into the wall with its tail before flying away. Fjall gets up and growls, bulking up like the Hulk with a mat on. He grabs a humongous blade from a fallen statue and throws it at the monster as it circles back around to attack, hitting it in the head and making it crash into the balcony. Cian, the dwarf, and tavern guy show up. But we cut back to the square, where Lenny Henry is trying to flame broil the witch and Sindril. He is giving another villain speech, telling Sindril that all his life, people like him have dismissed Lenny, all while Lenny keeps throwing streams of flame at their hiding place. Sindril tells the witch they have to use his chaos magic against him, binding Sindril with him. He runs from behind the column, firing magic at Lenny to little effect. The witch also runs out and Sindril yells, "Now! Bind me to him!" She causes tendrils to shoot out of the flagstones of the court, wrapping around Lenny. More shoot out and wrap around Sindril and the monolith. Sindril then shoots magic at the monolith and Lenny, and more magic shoots from Lenny to the monolith. And we get another cut. The dwarf is prodding the monster's corpse with her hammer to make sure it is dead. The mercenary leader strolls out onto the balcony laughing at the monster, and Fjall rises and tears him in half with his bare hands. The others yell his name in shock, but Tavern Guy tells them that Fjall is gone and tries to stop him. Fjall punches him in the face once, seemingly killing him as the right side of his face is crushed and his eye is gone. Fjall then goes after Cian and the dwarf. Ayla starts singing behind him, stopping him. He begins gasping. She lays a hand on his shoulder and he turns, growling. She tells him to come back to her. He puts a hand up to her face and says, "Please." She begins crying, saying she can't. He tells her to live, and he will wait for her in the great halls beyond. He then growls and grabs her throat. She stabs him in the chest. He falls into her lap and dies in her arms. She screams. And that should have been the last scene before the wrap-up scenes and we end this mess, but we are dealing with incompetents who then cut back to the square, where both Lenny Henry and Sindril are screaming. Sindril puts a hand on the monolith and Lenny says, "No!" right before we get a skybeam right out of a Marvel movie, shooting up from the monolith. Evelyn's mage comes out and helps the witch get up. Then we get more unnecessary narration telling us what we are seeing on screen. Sindril did not realize the release of energy would shatter the monolith, but also shatter space and time itself. The veil between worlds broke, and the conjunction of the spheres happened, scattering species and merging worlds. Then everything fell silent. Then we see Elven script on the screen before it turns into Yaruga Delta. We see a bunch of shipwrecks on the beach, with bodies strewn about. The continent awakes. And we see a human asking where she is, and an elf answering her in unintelligible Elvish. Then we go back to Ayla. And she's giving Fjall, whose body apparently did not decompose at all on the trip from Zentrea, back to what looks like Innis Duv from the first episode. The flames are well advanced, but his face is still untouched as she stands and watches, with tears flowing. And singing starts, though she is not the one singing, or at least not visibly since her mouth isn't moving. Then we see Cian doing a sword dance back where she started, her clan's sword in her hand as she does the ritual dance with it in a circle of stone mounds. Then we see the witch, crying over a cairn in the forest. Tavern Guy, apparently not dead, walks up behind her, his face sort of fixed, but his eye is missing still, making the cairn probably Sindril's grave. And then we see Gay Merchant Dude, mournfully caressing a shattered monolith on a beach for reasons. And then we see military guy with a scraggly beard on a hellish world, kneeling in black sand and pulling out the skull of some creature and putting it on his own head like a mask. Again, for reasons? And then we're back with Cian. We see the pattern she was cutting in the sand with the sword, and she kneels in the sand and buries the sword. A slight smile on her face as she raises her face to the sky, seemingly in prayer. And then we're back with Ayla, crying at the pyre. All through these tableaus, the woman's voice, presumably Ayla's, is singing a mournful song. And then 6 moons later, we see an elf woman nailing a sign to a board already almost full with them, each with a different drawing and a message on them. The woman's sign reads, "Wanted. Brave elves to slay vodniks. Top coin paid." She goes into the tavern from the first episode where a pregnant Ayla is singing. The dwarf is with her and they eat with the tavern girl and her mother. She tells the girl that her prophecy happened. She slayed a beast, just not the beast she was expecting. She has the girl touch her swollen stomach and she has a vision. She says that one of the lark's line will carry forth the note of a song that shall end all times. And we're back with Jaskier, in the stone circle as he takes notes while Mini Driver tells him that one of the lark's blood shall sing the last. He looks up and says, "What? Who?" And Mini Driver is gone. Her voice tells him to sing the Song of the Seven, Sandpiper. Rain starts to fall, dotting his notes, and he is suddenly back at the battle, where this whole stupid thing began. He hides the notes away from the rain, and Mini Driver ends with an exhortation that he sing, so people will find hope in the tales of their ancestors, and be ready for the change that is coming. And thankfully, that steaming pile of excrement was over. I figured the last episode in this creatively bankrupt enterprise would be bad. But damn! My brain was so numb with the stupid, and it took me so long to watch it while stopping to take notes frequently, that I had to watch something else just to cleanse myself of the sheer incompetent imbecility of the whole thing before I could gather my thoughts appropriately. I watched the last 2 episodes of Wednesday, again, in case anybody wants something that is actually good on Netflix to watch, instead of that nonsense. So, what did my brain come up with after decompressing? Oh, lordy. Quite a bit, and not all of it YouTube friendly. My most clamoring thought was that this was supposed to be an origin story of the Witchers. And while we definitely saw what could be called a Witcher in what Sindril and the Witch did to Fjall, Fjall died, along with Sindril. So where the hell are the Witchers at the end of this moronic tale? They seem to suggest that maybe Ayla's baby could be the next Witcher, but then Witchers would be hereditary, and that is not how they work in either the Witcher series or the books, at least from what I understand. It is a magical process done to children to make Witchers, not something that is inherited. And there are obviously no Witchers 6 moons after everything went down at the palace, because there was a message board full of help wanted posters for monster slayers in a tiny village like Innisdove. Never mind what is needed in more populated areas. Which brings me to the final scenes with Jaskier, which also started this whole show off. Both the prophecy the tavern girl gives Ayla when she touches her pregnant belly, and the narration Mini Driver gives Jaskier as he takes notes, seems to suggest he might be Ayla's heir being talked about in said prophecy. If so, is he also the one to be singing the note that will end all times? And is that metaphorical? Or is this mysterious singer really going to be singing in the end of the world? Are they going to be tying this into the Witcher main series? It was all sloppily written, and was merely one more thing making me want to throw my hands up in exasperation with it all. Then we have the whole conjunction of the spheres. The way it was done was anticlimactic and half-assed. All we see is a very short scene of people shipwrecked on a coast and one human woman talking to an elf man before we are cutting away to the cleanup scenes with the 7 fools this series followed. Given the conflict that erupted between elves and the newly arrived humans, never mind the chaos the monsters must have brought, this is such a ham-handed way to show what should have been a tumultuous event that would lead to war between humans and elves, leaving elves scrabbling to survive out in the hinterlands, while humans created kingdoms and empires we see in the Witcher main series. And speaking of the kingdoms and empires of humans, they seem to be more numerous than elves in the Blood Origin. And yet, they are not so incompetent in agricultural management that they are on the brink of general starvation, to the point of thinking of doing something so idiotic as to plan conquering worlds they know nothing about with no resources to take with them to feed troops in battle, as Empress Evelyn and Lenny Henry were planning to do. I keep coming back to this, but what the hell are they doing with all of the people who should have been farming all of the empty land we see the main characters traveling through in this show? The level of absolute incompetence this suggests is beyond staggering if you really think about it, and I think it is actually implausible. It goes down to the abysmal writing on this show that this is the plot device they are using to drive the story forward and spur the characters in all of their actions. It makes no sense whatsoever. Added on to that stupidity is the driving force of Lenny Henry. How did Evelyn's father not have him killed? Or Evelyn's brother, for that matter? He obviously had a burning inferiority complex that was plain to see from the start. Were the kings of Zentrea drooling imbeciles? Is that what was going on? Because that would actually explain away a number of problems with this series. But then, how are they not overthrown long before the events of this series? Either by the clans or the military and the mages, as eventually happened when the megalomaniacal and grandly delusional Merwin came along. And then we come to stylistic choices that just baffled the mind and made this show so bland. First and foremost was the fact that you could put pointy ears on all of the cast of the Witcher main series, and there would be no difference. Elves and humans are interchangeable, with nothing making them special when comparing the two races. It's the same problem that Amazon's The Rings of Power had. Now, maybe Andrzej Sapkowski wrote his elves in a different manner than J.R.R. Tolkien, whose elves were the ethereal beings that Peter Jackson tried to make them in his trilogy of The Lord of the Rings. And it was the comparison of the elves from those movies and the rather blandly normal-looking elves in The Rings of Power that helped kill the feel of Tolkien, highlighting its lack in that series. The same kind of thing could be said of the Blood Origins elves, or even the few elves that we see in The Witcher. And whether that is laziness on the part of the people responsible for this mess, or whether that is actually how they are written in the Witcher book series, is something for the Witcher fans to let me know, since I have not read the books. But it is a poor choice when trying to distinguish different races in fantasy series. There has to be something other than pointy ears that makes them different. Then we get to the choice of casting an actual actress with dwarfism that I've already touched upon in the second episode review. The actress did well, as could be expected, with what she was given in the script. But I still think the choice diminished what should have been a pretty awesome character. It is, however, a symptom of how this show was cast more broadly. The writing was so bad that most of the actors could rightly blame the writing for their terrible performances. However, Ayla and the Witch were two that did not work for me. Ayla's actress, Sophia Brown, was not impressive, and in some scenes just downright unbelievable in the role she was chosen to play. And that is a good summation of her filmography when you look it up. It is populated with small film roles, bit parts in series, or main roles in series that died quick deaths, or tiny guest appearances for 1 or 2 episodes. To put her as the main character in a major series was a mistake, above and beyond the terrible writing. She needed to be impressive to carry this series, and she wasn't. That they de-emphasized Lawrence O'Fioran in his role as Fjall, basically making him Ayla's sidekick, did not help. If he was actually an equal in this show, maybe he could have helped Sophia Brown carry it. As it was, he was a follow-along. The casting of Lenny Henry was also a mistake. He did not do well in The Rings of Power, and in this he was a chief bad guy, and someone with gravitas should have been cast. At least someone whose career has not been mostly dormant since the 1990s, where he did comedic work. The only thing he's done recently is voice work and being a presenter or contributor on this or that awards show, compilation, or charity program for the most part. Jacob Collins-Levy as military guy was an equally bad choice, given he has a resume that compares to Sophia Brown's in its lack of impressiveness. Add into that his slight build and meek characterization on the show, and I have to assume he was cast because he looks like a boy band refugee in between groups. He was the furthest thing from looking like he had ever held a sword in actual combat, as almost anyone in the cast, the Empress's pet mage and maybe the witch excluded. Speaking of the Empress, Mirren Mack as Merwin was also a bad choice of casting. She is another one that has a thin filmography, and at no point did she strike me as Empress material. And maybe, if I want to be generous and credit the people running the show with some kind of cellular material in the cerebrum, that was the point of casting her. Even if it was, she was not convincing, and she looked patently ridiculous in the armor they had her squeezed into in the last 2 episodes. That they tried to make her out as some kind of capable fighter was also ludicrous. That military guy did not laugh in her face when she gripped forearms with him at the beginning of this last episode was an impressive feat of acting on his part. He was still bad in the role, however. There were other problems with certain actors throughout the show, but the parts are not worth dissecting because they were so small. The sets in this show were hit or miss throughout the show, with the palace sets being the worst. I said in the first episode review, and I stand by it, that they looked like they got a modern decorator to make the sets in a modern minimalist style. It is not how medieval palaces would look. Whether you were to visit Europe, the Middle East, India, China, Japan, go even further back in time and the palaces get even less like the palace Netflix came up with for this show. Palaces had purpose and functions, and nothing in the palace scenes in this show make me think anyone actually lived or worked in this palace. Not even the Empress's private quarters. They looked like something you would set up for a magazine photo shoot or so a real estate agent could show it for prospective buyers. No functionality or wear and tear evident. It might as well just have been taken out of a package. It was so sterile looking. Probably the only thing I could not really pick at in this show was the costuming. The weapons and armor were decent. Nothing to get excited about, but certainly not the absolute useless messes we saw in the Rings of Power. The wardrobe of the Empress, her armor of the last 2 episodes notwithstanding, was pretty good, as were those of the rest of her cabal. The clothing of the commoners looked like clothing of commoners of a like time period. And the clothing of the 7 idiots we got to follow around for 4 episodes was also decent. The costume department should not be expecting awards nominations, but they should also not be ashamed of themselves as those who worked on the rings should be, or any other department other than costuming in this show. Finally, the locations were gorgeous. Iceland is a land of beauty, and it is on full display in this series. Cinematography was gorgeous throughout, and the cinematographer should be happy with how this series looked, if nothing else with this show. The exception, of course, is the CGI aerial shots of Zentrea itself. For the most part, they look like what they were, CGI. At no point was I impressed with them. They were not execrable, as so many other aspects of this show were, but the CGI artists should have been able to do better. Whether it was lack of talent or skimping by Netflix to save the budget on this disaster, who knows, except for those who worked on it. Overall, Netflix could not have come up with a worse attempted spin-off in their wannabe franchise than The Witcher Blood Origin. However, Lauren Hissrich finally got to see what The Witcher would have looked like if she did not have Henry Cavill continually trying to yank her back towards the source material, as he is rumored to have done the entire 3 seasons he was contracted for. This is The Witcher as envisioned by the showrunner, and she got to see it come to fruition under the guidance of her writing accomplice, Declan de Barra. If Netflix had anyone with sense at the top, both of them would be canned and banned from disgracing Netflix's doorstep ever again. Alas, in today's Hollywood, creative voids of talent fail upward, and I doubt this will be any different. I would not be surprised if it is announced that both Declan de Barra and Lauren Hissrich are given new projects to mangle in the near future. That is all I have for this video. If you like what I do here, please hit the like button and share the video. Please subscribe to the channel and make sure the bell icon is clicked on so you are notified when new videos are uploaded. And please leave a comment or constructive criticism below. I will be back with a new video in the next day or so involving the coming Daredevil Resurrection on Disney Plus and the news about where that will be likely going. Until then, tschüss.